All right, as you know on this channel, we like to have a bit of fun. So today I'm going to take you through 5 stories, 5 scandals, if you will. Not exactly the biggest crimes in mixed martial arts history, but 5 stories that, yeah, they're a bit of fun. They're a little scandalous. Well, some of them aren't that fun, actually. Some of them are just downright terrible. But we'll get to some of those. But some of them, like number 5, they're not that bad, you know. In fact, because it involves my mate, DC. So anyway, here are 5 scandalous stories throughout the world of UFC and mixed martial arts. Number 5, Daniel Cormier and towelgate. Yeah, you know this one had to be on there. My friend, my commentating partner, my colleague, and just all-round good guy, lovable teddy bear of mixed martial arts, Daniel Cormier, the double champ himself, Mr. DC. Listen, towelgate, we know what happened, but we're going to go through it. DC, as we know, he started and ended his mixed martial arts career as a heavyweight. He won the Strikeforce Grand Prix at heavyweight in 2012, and he finished his UFC run as a heavyweight as well. Now, throughout his course of his career, he had 6 UFC heavyweight fights and 9 UFC light heavyweight fights. He went down to light heavyweight, of course, because Cain Velasquez, one of his best friends and training partners, was the reigning heavyweight champion of the time. So you got to give DC a tremendous amount of respect for that, because guess what? Making 205 pounds for that man is not an easy task. At UFC 210 in 2017, the rematch was scheduled between the late Anthony Johnson, Mr. Rumble himself, and of course Daniel Cormier. And the pair of them were struggling to make weight. Listen, Rumble, how he ever made 170 and all the other weight classes is beyond me. And of course, rest in peace, what an absolute legend. But as we know, DC, it was never easy for him. Now, when he approached the scales for the first attempt, he was 1.2 pounds over the 205 pound limit. And at that point in time, he was over it. He was done, okay? He said, stick a fork in me. I am done, because he refused to cut any more weight. Now, his team, they were losing their mind. And they even got his wife on the phone, apparently, to try and talk some sense into him. But even she couldn't convince him to jump in the salt bath for 5 more minutes. He was going to lose his fight, essentially, on the scales. The first time that would have happened, of course, we know it did happen with Charles Oliveira last year. So his coaches, they reminded him of an old wrestling trick. You put your hands on the towel, which will support the weight of your arms and therefore make you a little bit lighter. Okay, so DC went back. He said, guys, I'm going to give it one more try, but I'm going to strip down naked, you know, so don't be having a look at the Johnson, so to speak. And DC couldn't believe it. It worked. Both commissioners were so focused on looking at the scale, they didn't look at him. Well, they didn't look at his hands to see where they were. They were looking at the scale to see where it was going to land. He had his hands on the towel. You know, look, imagine there's a towel there. I rest my arms on it. They're pulling it tight. That supports my weight. And all of a sudden, he went from being overweight to on weight. Bish, bash, bosh. There we go. Now, Anthony Johnson's coaches, of course, were rightly furious because Rumble had missed weight before, once by 12 pounds. And DC's camp in the media, they had been all over Rumble not to make weight. So, of course, they were pissed that DC somehow had got away with cheating. And listen, DC, we love this guy, one of the best guys in the MMA community. He confessed to it all during his Hall of Fame speech in 2022. He said, and I quote, "Do you understand the level of ridiculousness that has to happen in order for that to work? I looked down and I couldn't believe my luck. I'm a lucky guy." Number 4, Jon Jones cancels UFC 151. Now, listen, we know Jon Jones is the GOAT, and don't start, that's another conversation, okay? But he's had as many controversies as he has title wins. One of the biggest in his saga of controversies was at UFC 151, the first Zuffa Era event to ever be cancelled. UFC 151 was scheduled for September the 1st, 2012 at the Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas. The main event was Jon Jones making his 4th defense of his belt against Dan Henderson. Now, Henderson was 4-0 in his last 4, so doing very well. He had knocked out Fedor Emelianenko and Shogun Rua, amongst others, along the way to winning Fight of the Year. So, of course, Henderson was on fine form. But on August 23rd, 9 days before the event, Henderson informed the UFC they had torn his MCL weeks before and he couldn't fight. Now, the UFC, obviously, because of that, they were kind of annoyed that Henderson left it to the last minute to inform them because, obviously, they've got to find the replacement. So, former champ Lyoto Machida, Mr. Uran drinker himself, he turned down the fight, saying that he wanted Anderson Silva money to rematch Jon Jones. Remember, Jones had submitted him at UFC 140. But Chael Sonnen, yes, Wesleyan, Oregon's bad guy, coming off a loss to Anderson Silva for the middleweight title, he accepted the fight on less than a week's notice. Of course, Jon Jones, the champ, he gets a say and presented with Chael Sonnen as an opponent. He said, I will consult my coach, Greg Jackson. Jackson told him that fighting Chael Sonnen on short notice would be the biggest mistake of his career. And on that advice, Jones refused the fight. With no alternative and no time to put on another main event, the event was cancelled. The first ever UFC event in the Zuffa era had to be called off. Jon Jones wouldn't fight Chael Sonnen on a couple of weeks' notice. I'm just saying, listen, I took on Chael on less than a week's notice. Just throwing that out there. You know, maybe I'm the GOAT. Who knows? Number 3, Wanderlei Silva, the axe murderer, runs all the way to Brazil to avoid a drug test. Yeah, it sounds pretty obvious, doesn't it? I mean, come on, listen, the man was juiced out of his mind. We all know that. Wanderlei Silva, thank you for the memories, and thank you for the fight that we had in Sydney, Australia. Wanderlei was a legendary fighter, and one of the guys that really inspired me when I first started my mixed martial arts career. And foolishly, I always wanted to fight him, and I did get to do that. And I was robbed by the judges by a decision. But, as I say, he was a legendary fighter in the Pride FC organization in the 2000s. He was a Pride middleweight champ at 200 pounds. He was the champion for half a decade. He brutally knocked out Rampage Jackson twice. He beat a who's who of that era, including Kazushi Sakuraba and Guy Mezger. And he was so talented that he could even hang with the heavyweights, had some sensational fights with the likes of Mark Hunt and, of course, Mirko Krokop, who he went to a draw with. Now, he did all this in an organization that specifically told fighters in writing that they will not be tested for performance-enhancing drugs. Things like cannabis, etc., you will be tested for, but performance-enhancing drugs, in the contract, you will not be tested. Now, of course, a lot of the Pride fighters came over to the UFC, where they do test. Even before USADA, there was drug testing on the night, and when some of those people came over, well, they didn't perform quite as well. Now, fast forward a few years to 2014, and Wanderlei Silva had accepted a fight against Chael Sonnen. He's popping up a lot in this at UFC 175 at International Fight Week. Now, as we know, these two did not like each other. They did a season of The Ultimate Fighter together where they actually got into like a legit fight on the set.
I can't let you get close.
And anytime you have that kind of promotion, you know that is going to deliver huge pay-per-view sales. That fight was going to be massive. Chael Sonnen, big star. Wanderlei Silva, big star. And of course, they got into a fight in the gym. It's all set. But that all changed when the Nevada State Athletic Commission showed up at Wanderlei's Las Vegas gym to conduct a random drug test. Now, according to reports in the media at the time, Wanderlei refused. Wanderlei then legged it out the side door, and he kept legging it all the way to Brazil. He literally drove to the airport, got on a plane, and by the time that he landed, Nevada was already in the process of suspending him from competition. And this all resulted in Wanderlei Silva being banned for life from the sport of mixed martial arts, along with a $70,000 fine. Now listen, it's worth mentioning that he did hire a lawyer and try and appeal it and all the rest of it, but we'll leave that one there. Number 2, no-show Nick Diaz. Yes, cult favorite, icon of mixed martial arts, both of them, Nick and Nate. People love these guys, from the scandalous to the hilarious. This is the story of Nick Diaz no-showing his way out of one of the biggest fights in 2011. In 2011, the biggest fight that the UFC could make was George St. Pierre versus Nick Diaz for the welterweight title. George was far into his reign as the welterweight champ. Nick was on an 11-fight unbeaten streak outside of the UFC that included beatdowns of Frank Shamrock and a sensational back-and-forth war with Paul Daly. So this was in many ways Strikeforce versus UFC for the welterweight title. It was all set for UFC 137, October 29th, Las Vegas, Nevada. But as we know, Nick's kind of an introvert. As much as he's a badass inside the ring, doesn't like all the pomp and circumstance surrounding it, doesn't like doing interviews, doesn't like media or crowds. And he no-showed interviews, he no-showed flights to Las Vegas, he even no-showed conference calls. listen, you got to pick up when the UFC call you. Dana and the UFC, they couldn't believe it. I mean, come on, this had never happened before. Press conferences cost a lot of money. Booking satellite time for TV slots, for interviews, all these kind of things, they aren't cheap. But Nick, he didn't show for the PRs, for the press conference or anything. Now listen, there was a plan put in place apparently. This is what Anthony Evans, my channel manager, who worked for the UFC at the time, tells me. He said a plan was put in place to get Nick Diaz to the press conference. Nick was going to stay at his mentor / trainer's house, Cesar Gracie. UFC would send staff to Cesar Gracie's house, and together they get him to the presser in Las Vegas. But with the car outside the house ready to go, Nick told them that he was going to use the bathroom and jumped out the window and disappeared into the wind. Now, apparently there was a big search for Nick Diaz throughout his neighborhood. Every number was called, every friend's house was visited, and every potential hiding place searched. But Nick Diaz had disappeared like a fart in the wind. Now, the UFC had spent over $15,000 that week on flights, etc., that Nick Diaz didn't show to. And the press conference did go ahead, but this time it was George St. Pierre and Carlos Condit. Yes, they brought in Condit because they couldn't be doing with the shenanigans anymore. But ironically, both George St. Pierre and Carlos Condit pulled out of 137 with injuries. And by the time UFC 137 happened, it was Nick Diaz beating down the prodigy, the legend, BJ Penn in the main event. And Nick did eventually fight George St. Pierre at UFC 158, losing out on points in what was one of the biggest fights in UFC history at that time. Number 1, the testosterone replacement era. Yes. The TRT era. Shame on all you people that said it. Look, listen, if you're a dad, if you're a bodybuilder, if you want to stay in shape, if you're getting older, I don't care what you do. You can do whatever you want, but if you're stepping foot in a boxing ring, a kickboxing ring, a UFC octagon or anything similar, and you're taking performance-enhancing drugs, well then shame on you. I say it all the time, this isn't basketball. We're not putting a ball in a basket. We're trying to knock someone's head clean off, okay? But the Athletic Commissions around 2008 decided that taking testosterone replacement therapy was okay. And that opened the door for so many cheating sons of guns. I could use stronger language, but YouTube are very sensitive these days. I mean, the TRT era is like looking back at things like using children as chimney sweeps. I mean, how did anyone ever think it was okay, right? TRT is basically injecting synthetic testosterone into your ass so you get the testosterone levels of a 24-year-old. Usually also you get a pill to reduce the estrogen levels, you know, what is commonly known as bitch tits. The result is more muscle, better recovery from exercise, and improved speed, strength, endurance, not only in training, but in competition. And that's the big thing. You know, listen, it doesn't make somebody Superman, but it allows you to recover better. So normally you're training on a Monday, by Tuesday, Wednesday, certainly Thursday, you're tired, you're lethargic, you don't want to train, your body's beat up. When you're taking performance-enhancing drugs, it allows you to recover quicker. So every day when you show up to the gym, you can give 100%. So of course you get better results. Now, as I say, TRT, that's fine for dads that want to look better and stay in shape, but not in a sport where you have knees to the face. But somehow, having said all that, all it took was for fighters to go to a doctor and get a letter to say that this fighter needs testosterone replacement therapy because his testosterone is low. Do you know what happens if you take a lot of steroids when you're in your prime, when you don't really need it? It affects your natural production of testosterone. So these people that were cheating throughout the course of their career, which affected their natural production of testosterone, were then getting rewarded because they would go to a doctor and they say, yeah, he's got low testosterone. Here you go. Here's some more. And here's a letter from a doctor that was actually making money by being a TRT doctor. Of course, they're going to give you that letter. Now, the poster child for TRT was none other than Vitor Belfort. Yes, my old best mate. Listen, he'd failed 2 tests before. Once at a Pride FC event in Las Vegas in 2006 and a random Nevada drug test in 2014. As I said, one of the consequences of using gear is that it messes up your natural production. So, of course, he would go to the doctor and they would give him a letter. Now, of course, there was others. It wasn't just Vitor Belfort. There was Dan Henderson, Nate Marquardt, Todd Duffy.
All you motherfuckers, all you're on steroids.
I mean, to be fair, Dan Henderson probably did need it towards the end of his career because he was a proper dinosaur. Fair play to that man, respect due. But as I said, on February 27, 2014, the Nevada State Athletic Commission finally voted to ban TRT, and the UFC immediately followed suit. Now, of course, we saw massive transformations of some of those people that were on TRT to when they came off it, and the poster child for that one was Vitor Belfort, because he went from looking like Hugh Jackman to Hugh Hefner. All the best. Take care. Subscribe, ring the bell. See you soon.